from the New York City Summit on Children. This is a special edition of BrianLehrer.tv. The summit was held on November 25th, 2013, and hosted by Columbia University's The Earth Institute. Why a summit now on the health, education, and well-being of children? Well, because the experts here know the city is listening. The next mayor, Bill deBlasio, is about to take office. His central theme has been to lessen inequality, and children are a priority in this effort. The mayor-elect gave the keynote at this summit. Let's watch highlights of that, and then I'll be back to host a panel called What Makes Successful Children?
I today stand before you ready to mount a strong and consistent fight for the things that will make a difference. And that means free, high-quality, full-day pre-K for every child in New York City. And we need that now. And it means after-school, free, after-school programming for every middle school child in this city to reinforce that level of education that was so often ignored, that crucial transcendent moment in a child's education. Free and fully available after school for every middle school child in this city. Now, to do this, we will need resources, and I've said time and time again, we will need dedicated resources. Not the kind of resources that get lost in the middle of budget battles and deficits. A dedicated revenue stream. And I proposed over a year ago a tax on those in this city who make $500,000 or more for the next 5 years. It is a small addition to their local taxation. It will make a huge difference in the lives of our children, a transformational difference. It will be an investment that we will feel the positive result of for years and decades to come if we get it right. Now, thank you. I know this is a case of preaching to the choir. This is a room of folks who probably don't need to be convinced on the importance of early childhood education and after school. But let me arm you with some of the facts that I think will help as you go forward to make this case with us that we need this transformational moment. Let's start with after school. Few programs, few areas of government have seen as much in the way of cutbacks as after school. We have lost 30,000 seats, 30,000 after-school seats a year in this city since the year 2008. So we have 30,000 fewer seats available to our children today than we had in 2008. According to the After School Alliance, nearly 1 in 4 kids in this city is left alone and unsupervised once school ends. And of course, almost a half of the city's families are single-parent households. So the need is profound, and what we have done in recent years in government, unfortunately, has taken us in the wrong direction. Now, you look at the result of kids not having a place to go after school, not having programming, not having support. You know, California did a study. The California Juvenile Crime Prevention Demonstration Project found that after-school programs successfully reduced juvenile violence. They looked at 12 high-risk communities, and they found that the likelihood of teens carrying a concealed weapon and the likelihood of youth arrests were reduced by half when after-school programs were available. And we know that it's particularly crucial in the middle school years, and I can tell you this, I like to say, now that Dante and Kiara are a little older, I like to say I am a recovering middle school parent. For anyone who is a parent of middle school children or has taught middle school children, you know exactly what I mean. And I remember when I was a school board member in Brooklyn, there was the area I think drew the deepest concern from parents was why there wasn't more focus on middle school, more support, more of the support enrichment that would help kids at that particularly difficult transitional moment. Well, we have a chance to do it. And by the way, we have working models right now that we know work right here in the city. The After School Corporation, a particularly good example, and the one I used when I proposed my plan over a year ago. Great example of a local success story not far from here, the Thurgood Marshall Middle School in Harlem, which partners with Abyssinian Baptist Church. Now, here's how it works. They have 180 kids in the middle school. 135 of them participate in after school because it's available and because it's free. And that means, for the typical child in that school, 300 additional hours a year of academic enrichment. Each child getting 300 more hours, and think of the impact that is making and how that is keeping them on a positive track and, of course, keeping them away from some of the tough influences that pervade our city. So we have the model, we have the need. It's time to make this a priority, and as a matter of policy, guarantee that every middle school child in the city has a safe place to go after school where they can continue to learn and grow and do better every single year. When you think about early childhood now, pre-K, research shows that pre-K, full-day pre-K, reduces income inequality and increases social mobility. And people in this room know why. 85% of brain development occurs by the age of 5, before many children had ever set foot in a school. So we know that we have a great opportunity for action if we make the investment. The National Bureau of Economic Research issued a study this May. It said pre-K can reduce the achievement gap by up to 40%. Another report by the Ounce of Prevention Fund found that in the absence of high-quality early childhood education, at-risk children, and these are sobering statistics, at-risk children are 25% more likely to drop out of school, 40% more likely to become a teen parent, 50% more likely to be placed in special education, and 70% more likely to be arrested for a violent crime. And if you look at this in perspective, nationally, internationally, according to the White House, nationally, fewer than 30% of 4-year-olds are enrolled in high-quality preschool programs. So this is a problem in this city, is a problem nationally, but guess what? In the rest of the world, and I think people in this room know it, in the rest of the world, the devotion to investing rapidly in early childhood education is growing by the day. Our economic competitors get it. China is moving to double the number of children with early childhood education by 2020, as is India. The European Union embraced a target of 95% enrollment in early childhood education by 2020. In Brazil, early childhood education is a constitutional right. So the world around us has figured it out and is acting. In New York City, by contrast, in New York City today, of almost 70,000 kids, specifically 68,000 kids eligible for pre-K, only 20,000 get full-day pre-K. So almost 50,000 kids who should get full-day pre-K don't. And if you want to look at what that means to parents, well, here's the ratio of applications for pre-K to available seats. In the Bronx, it's 3.5 to 1 applications to available seats. In Brooklyn, 4 to 1. And Staten Island, 4 to 1. In Manhattan and Queens, 5 to 1. Some of our pre-K programs in our public schools have lower acceptance rates than some Ivy League universities. I'm in the right place to talk about this. Manhattan's PS 89 had 471 applications for 32 pre-K seats. Those are about the same odds in terms of applications to acceptance, about the same odds as getting into Yale, Columbia, or Princeton. I should say better, Columbia, Yale, or Princeton. Now, when that many people can't get pre-K for their children, that is not the mark of a great city, and it's not the mark of a city that's investing in the right place. It's not the mark of a city ready to do better, even as we look around the world and see others having made this decision and acting on it. So I've made clear my administration will hit the ground running, and on this issue it will be front and center on our agenda. In the days ahead, I will be announcing an early education working group. It'll be a group of educators, nonprofit leaders, advocates, government professionals who will work to make sure the plans are in place to act on the initiative that I've proposed, that we are identifying the best curriculum practices and the upcoming trends in how we can do even better, that we're recruiting. We have a plan to recruit and train and retain the best early childhood educators, that we are making sure space is being secured rapidly for the thousands of children who need, and that we are identifying best practices from all over the country that could be utilized here as we build out full-day pre-K for all. We have begun this process in our transition. We will continue it seamlessly into government. I'll conclude with this. To make this change, everyone in this room has a stake in this, and everyone in this room is an actor in this drama. This is a moment in history where we get to determine if we will make the change, and it will come down to the work all of you do in the coming months. I have not offered a small Band-Aid solution. I haven't offered a pilot program or a boutique concept. I have offered a game-changing investment in early childhood education and after school. Nothing less will do. Now, we know the people agree with this. The people of this city squarely agree with this agenda. We've seen it in public opinion surveys. We've seen it in the outcome of this election. It's up to us to now achieve this plan, here and in Albany. I am again speaking to a group of people who know what it is to fight for our children, and it's time to do it again. We have plenty of allies all over the city, plenty of allies in Albany ready to stand with you to make sure we get these changes. We have a coalition of leaders growing every day, elected officials and community leaders, and parents from all over the city ready to fight for these changes. And they don't want it to be sometime in the future. They want this to start in the year 2014 because our children need this help now. And the future of the city depends on it. And as I've said, we will not achieve this change without you. With you, we can take a huge step forward in addressing the core challenge of inequality, the core challenge of our time. We must make sure that every child, and I mean every child, has high-quality early childhood education, has an opportunity at middle school level to have after school available for free, and that we are using every tool we have to fight inequality and to make a change in our society once and for all. And when we take this step forward, it will be the first step towards a more just society for all. Thank you, and God bless you.
To my journalist ear, the mayor-elect made news in a few ways. One, it was interesting to me that he seemed to elevate middle school years after school to equal billing today with universal pre-K, which he's more better known for. So I'll be curious to get the panel's reaction to that as we go. He also mentioned the nation of Brazil, which has pre-K as a constitutional right, as well as other nations that we're competing with, elevating it maybe more quickly than the United States. So maybe Michael Rebell, who knows how to use the court system for education, might help find a constitutional right for universal pre-K. We'll get a reaction to that. But let me introduce the panelists, and then each of them, as I think was the format this morning, I wasn't here, but I think the format was the same. Everybody's going to present for 5 minutes, and then we will all have conversation around what they do present. Please welcome Hirokazu Yoshikawa. He is the Courtney Sale Ross University Professor of Globalization and Education at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at NYU. And Michael Rebell, Executive Director of the Campaign for Educational Equity and Professor of Law and Educational Practice at Teachers College. Vanessa Ramos, Senior Director for Policy at the Committee for Hispanic Children and Families. And Lucy Friedman, Founding President of the After School Corporation. And with that, we will give it to our first speaker. So, Dr. Yoshikawa, the floor is yours.
I'm going to speak today really about the very focused topic of early childhood education, primarily for 4-year-olds, since this is the heart of our mayor-elect's very exciting new proposal. This was a group effort, a research synthesis that was released in October of 2013. I want to thank all my co-authors, including Jeannie Brooks-Gunn of Columbia University. This is folks from 10 universities across the nation, brought together by Deborah Phillips, who was then the president of the Foundation for Child Development, about a couple months after President Obama's State of the Union address, because as many of you know, there was quite a lot of conflicting opinions coming out in the media about whether preschool is worth the investment. And so this was a group of some of the leading scholars in research on early childhood education programs and policies, and we in addition got input from about 25 other experts, including Larry Aber and Jane Waldfogel, who are in this room. So I want to thank really a very large group that came together around this. And if you simply Google the title, Investing in Our Future, the evidence base on preschool education, you'll be able to find it. So there are many issues that are raised by current proposals, including our mayor-elect, but also in Congress. So there was the first congressional bill following Obama's Preschool for All proposal was released last week, as many of you might know. So some of these questions that we think are really important, where in fact there is evidence, new evidence that goes beyond the Prairie Preschool and the Abecedarian study. For those of you who've been familiar with this field for a long time, the new evidence addresses very practical questions. Is preschool at scale worth the investment? Can quality preschool actually be implemented at scale across diverse cities? What are the specific dimensions of quality that make a difference, and how do we bring them about, again, at scale? And what do we know about subgroups, social inclusion, and impacts on inequality? From preschool, the best research that we have on preschool education. We focus, although we include the classic studies, we focus on the last 10 to 15 years of research, which we argue is less well known. People keep returning to the Prairie Preschool and the Abecedarian study, which were implemented in the late 60s and early 1970s, but we have a much more recent, exciting wave of evidence. So I'm just going to give you some of the highlights of on about 4 of the questions that I think are the most pressing as far as the planning for the possibility of universal preschool for 4-year-olds in New York City. What we know from a recent meta-analysis of the 84 most rigorous studies of early childhood education conducted between 1960 and 2007 is that the average impact of a year of preschool, above and beyond kids in typical comparison groups in these studies, many of whom are actually in center-based care themselves, is that there's about 1/3 of a year of additional learning in reading and math. And so for those of us in the social sciences, that's what we would call a small effect size, you know, not certainly nothing to ignore, but we're interested in this question of whether we can get larger impacts at scale. 2 new, relatively new studies, one from Tulsa, which Nick Kristof cited in his column, but an even newer one from Boston, which was released this week in the journal Child Development that I conducted with Christina Weiland of the University of Michigan. These 2 cities were able to produce gains of between half a year and a full year of additional learning. Again, above and beyond comparison groups, many of whom were attending other center-based programs. In Boston, for example, over half of the comparison group was attending a center-based program. So these are what we would call moderate to large effects, and those of you in the evaluation literature know how rare it is to find moderate to large effects in any area of educational or social programming, let alone at scale across entire cities, and these were conducted across the entire cities of Tulsa and Boston. So we have these new evidence from 2 cities that did implement preschool as a universal program, not as a targeted simply to disadvantaged children. So getting to this issue of quality preschool, which everyone talks about, but we see fewer definitions of. In the report, we talk about the extensive literature on quality. Of course, structural features matter. Teacher compensation, qualifications, group size, child-adult ratio all matter. But what is particularly important in addition is what we refer to as process quality, above and beyond these structural quality features, and that is the quality of teachers' interactions with children around both dimensions of responsiveness and warmth in their interactions, but also the specific stimulation and ability to build content-based skills. And so those are skills such as language skills, math skills, socio-emotional skills. So both of those kinds of features of process quality are important. Structural quality helps to increase the probability of being able to produce process quality, but it certainly doesn't assure that you will get high process quality. And if you look at the average quality in large-scale studies of US public preschool, we are disappointingly low, particularly on instructional quality, and that is the ability to support specific skills like early language and literacy or math skills. And that is across the board, whether we're talking about Head Start or public pre-K. And yet we know in Boston and Tulsa that their levels of instructional quality were substantially higher than the national average. And so the question is, what are the ways that that was done? So we find that it's the combination of developmentally focused curricula that really have that focus on content skills with intensive on-site or video-based mentoring or coaching. So if we think about theories of adult learning, this makes sense. You learn when somebody is observing and providing feedback in a supportive relationship to you. And so in Boston, these were coaches that were going in weekly to help teachers implement a reading and math curricula. Both of those were evidence-based, wonderful curricula that both teachers and children enjoyed. But these coaches were in there to help the teachers implement the curricula and to address other issues that these teachers were facing in a flexible way, such as behavior management. These systems at scale also institute regular monitoring of children's progress that is not high stakes, but designed to inform their daily practice, so what we call formative assessments in the early childhood or educational literatures. So are there positive effects for different subgroups? When a mayor or a president proposed universal preschool, we could ask, are there effects, positive effects on middle-class kids? It turns out there are only 2 studies at scale that looked at this, and those were the Boston and Tulsa evaluations. In both evaluations, substantial effects, positive effects were found for non-poor children, which is really very important, but there were simply larger effects for more disadvantaged children. And therefore, these programs reduced inequalities. It wasn't that middle-class children didn't benefit, but poor children and children of color, Latino kids, dual language learner kids, African-American kids benefited more. And so, for example, the Boston program completely wiped out the Latino white school readiness gap in reading and math skills and substantially reduced the income and African-American black-white school readiness gaps. Race, ethnicity, all groups benefit. Dual language learners and children of immigrants, again, with quality preschool benefit even more than their native English-speaking counterparts. And that is, again, given the context of quality instruction. And the 2 studies that have looked at children with special needs in these large-scale preschool programs that are mainstreamed also show benefits for that group. What's the return on investment? We know from we've known for years that the preschool program produces a large benefit cost ratio. The new data here is from Tulsa and now even more recently from Boston that are showing benefit cost ratios of between $3 and $5 for every dollar spent. Again, this is for systems at scale. And just to end, to set the global context that Jeff started us with, as co-chair of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we are proposing comprehensive early childhood development target and indicators for the UN member nations. Within the education goal of ensuring effective learning for all children and youth, our proposed target for early childhood is that all children under the age of 5 reach their developmental potential through access to quality early childhood development programs and policies. And so we think that the proposal of Mayor deBlasio Mayor-elect deBlasio is very much in keeping with what we hope will be this global target for the years 2016 to 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yoshikawa. Let's go right on to Michael Rebell.
Hey, well, like most of you here, I think most people here, I was quite heartened to see the energetic, affirmative manner in which Mayor-elect deBlasio said he was ready to fight for prompt transformational action in terms of pre-K and after school for all of New York City's children as soon as he takes over. And I guess he posed a challenge for all of us to work with him and do what we can to help advance that agenda. So what I'm going to propose, and what I know that I'm going to personally commit to, and I hope many of you in this room will, is to pick up the spirit of deBlasio's statements and say we've got to see this kind of work as mounting a campaign to have the political powers that be see these actions as rights of children, not as privileges, not as requests to the normal legislative agenda, but these are children's rights. And in that regard, I want to refer back to the CFE litigation that Shale Saransky mentioned this morning, because to a large extent, the highest court in this state, the Court of Appeals, has already said that children have many such rights in this area. Some of those rights have been recognized but haven't been fully enforced, and some of them have a potential for recognition that we've got to bring out. So let me talk first about the right that has been recognized by the Court of Appeals, and Shale actually alluded to it in saying that following the CFE case, the legislature, acknowledging that all children in the state of New York have a constitutional right to the opportunity for a sound basic education, spelled out how much that should cost and committed itself to a 4-year phase-in program of adequate funding for our public schools. This went along well for the first 2 years, then the recession hit. Since the recession, we've had freezes, we've had cuts, and at the present time, the state of New York owes the city a couple of $billion for its basic K-12 educational program. So when Jeff Sachs talks about Governor Cuomo setting up Governor Pataki and Carl McCall as a commission to figure out how to cut income taxes by $2 or $3 billion a year, he's forgetting there's an outstanding IOU there. It's an IOU to the children of the city of New York and to children upstate who are covered by this. And I hope there's ample room in the governor's budget for next year to cut taxes and also come up with about $3 billion for the state's school children. But that's really what's owed, and I think we have to be a lot more affirmative in asking for it. And one other footnote I'd make to that, many of you may remember last year, the governor and the state imposed a penalty on the children of the city of New York that amounted to $390 million because the UFT and the city's Department of Education were recalcitrant in negotiating a deal on teacher evaluations. I'm not getting into who was at fault in that negotiation, but the fact is the governor penalized the children because he withdrew money that had already been appropriated by the legislature. I haven't given up on that. As a matter of fact, we have a lawsuit pending, and I'm hoping we'll get a favorable result soon so I can give the mayor-elect an inauguration present of $390 million, which actually is how much he needs to implement the pre-K in the first year, I think. So I do think we need to be more affirmative about these issues. But let me talk about moving on past what the courts have clearly acknowledged as being part of this constitutional right, to say we've got to firm up that right further. Now, in the CFE case, the court defined the sound basic education to which all children are entitled in terms of major outcomes. And those outcomes were preparing our kids for capable citizenship, preparing our kids for the competitive global economy. And to do that, we knew we needed a firm K-12 adequately funded education system. But there was also language in those court decisions about how kids from an at-risk background need and have a constitutional right to extended day programs. So I think the after-school emphasis that the mayor-elect has put forth today already is part of the sound basic education to which kids are entitled. And I think we've got to examine that. We've got to bring that out more. The courts also mentioned the importance of pre-K. At the time, the legislature's universal pre-K was getting off the ground. And I remember Justice deGrasse looking at it and saying they're a little behind schedule. They better speed up so that kids are adequately prepared. We've had about 10 years of experience since then. Together with the Center on Children's Initiative, we've actually put out a program based on children having a right to pre-K that spells out how this should be spelled out, how this should be implemented at the present time. We see that as a complement to the mayor-elect's efforts in New York City. This would be statewide, and we think it should be promulgated as a statewide right for all kids in this state to have an adequate, high-quality preschool education. I also think that health, parental engagement, and other aspects that are clearly necessary for children to have a meaningful educational opportunity have to be perceived as part of this right to a sound basic education. So in terms of the charge to our panel about how we get there, from my legal advocacy policy perspective, how we get there is taking a firm stand, a proactive stand, non-apologetic, that kids are entitled to this. It's their right. It's a moral right. It's an ethical right. It's a political right. And I think it's a constitutional right.
Thank you, Michael Rebell. You're a tough audience. And Vanessa Ramos, Senior Director for Policy at the Committee for Hispanic Children and Families, is our next speaker.
I don't know if the slides are ready, otherwise I will do it without them. My name is Vanessa Ramos, Committee for Hispanic Children and Families. The organization was founded in 1982, and we combine programs and policy and education to support the well-being of Latino children and families. I think we're at a very important historical moment. We will have a new administration that is open and it has the political will to change education outcomes for the better of all of our children. And I also think this is an opportunity for this institution, Columbia University, for the people that are here at this panel, as well as for the new administration, to exercise their good offices and convince or persuade the US Senate to ratify the Convention of the Right of the Child, because in that convention it is recognized that education is a human right. So maybe that's why in countries like Brazil that have ratified this convention, education has a constitutional standard, just like most of the countries of the world. We don't want to be in the company of Somalia and South Sudan. We want to be in the world of human rights. Saying that, some of the other panelists have spoken about the importance of a comprehensive approach to education, and I give that also the next step, which is a comprehensive approach to education of English language learners. Let's embrace languages, let's embrace cultural diversity, and let's also talk about, the multi-dimensions of poverty that many suffer, as well as issues of health and mental health. What is our proposal, or one of our proposals, in order to improve the outcomes for English language learners? First of all, we have to develop that comprehensive vision of English language education that engages parents in the languages and their home languages, that develops the teachers and educators' development in terms of their education, particularly bilingual teachers, and that there is a respect and acceptance of other languages and cultures, create assessments in both English and home languages so that we will know what the child has learned and what the child is capable of doing, and outreach to families in languages other than English. Who are our English language learners in New York City? English language learners comprise 14.4% of the New York City's public school population, so it's a significant number. And of those, 63.4% speak Spanish as their primary language at home. So how about if we use that richness and encourage parents to use the home language, Spanish or any other language at home, to read, to write, to talk, because that is going to help in a second language acquisition. And only 34.4% of New York City English language learner students graduate from public high schools. I mean, this is totally unacceptable, and it's very, very sad for all of us. So what can we do? First, I will identify the issues. New York City still does not have a clear vision of English language education. There's not a comprehensive vision. Some schools use one system, others use English as a second language, others use English immersion, others use transitional bilingual education or dual education. We have, children learn differently, so we have to have an approach that makes sense and at the end will improve the outcomes for our children. The other part is that research has consistently shown that when a child is proficient in one language, the home language, the language acquisition to another language, second or third language, is going to be easier, and the child is going to take those concepts in the first language and transfer them to another language or other languages. And at the end, they will have English language proficiency. And how about if we capitalize on these languages and these cultures and this diversity? Because this is what happens in the US. Many parents are afraid of speaking in their language, in the home language, because, they said no because the child is going to get confused. These are the myths, or no because the child is not get accepted, or the child himself or herself says, I'm not going to speak Spanish or French or Creole because the other kids will start harassing me. And then when we get to high school, guess what? We repress the home language, and then we get to high school, we find out that we have to learn a second language. How about if we start from the early years to build on the languages and the diverse cultures and richness of cultures that we have in the city? So our solutions, our logo is accept, respect, promote, and encourage. Let's develop that comprehensive vision for education, English language education, and other forms of education. Let's bring in parents and welcome them to be partners in our children's education. Schools should be more welcoming to parents that speak other languages. Let's develop our professionals in other languages and cultures. Bilingual education is key and is crucial if this country is going to succeed in the world. Bilingualism is a building block. It's not a barrier. And we have to administer assessments in both English and home language. You cannot just take an assessment and translate it into Spanish and say that's an assessment, because that's totally incorrect. Now, with respect to early education, we need more programs in early care and education, and they have to be high quality, and let those programs also promote and embrace other languages and cultures. And we definitely have to, at the governmental level, at the non-governmental level, at the community level, have this massive outreach campaign where parents get informed about what their choices are in early education and the succeeding years, and the importance of continuing reading, writing, visualizing, dreaming in their home languages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final panelist, before we open it up for discussion, Lucy Friedman, founding president of the After School Corporation. Dr. Friedman.
Thank you, Brian. Today we've been talking about what children need to be successful, and I think we've heard a lot about the importance of positive early childhood experiences and high-quality learning opportunities throughout elementary and secondary school. Also, we've heard that children from low-income families have limited access to these crucial supports. And in fact, recently, we at TASC measured the gap, and it turns out that compared to middle-class kids, children living in poverty have spent 6,000 fewer hours learning when they enter the 6th grade. As children grow older, the gaps add up as poor children have fewer and fewer opportunities to access preschool and after-school and summer learning experiences. And it's not that low-income parents don't try. They've actually increased the amount of money that they spend on their kids' enrichments, but upper-income parents have increased their spending 10 times faster. So as we heard this morning, some of the gaps in health indicators are narrowing between low-income and higher-income kids. That's not happening in this arena. And as Mike Rebel said, it doesn't have to be this way. So we wanted to talk about how schools and community organizations can join forces to close this gap by expanding both the time and the ways that kids learn. So a word about task. We started out in 1998 to build a citywide, scalable after-school system of school-based programs operated by community organizations. And these organizations all have strong ties to their neighborhoods. And over the years, we saw that kids who attended high-quality after-school programs improved their school day attendance, their attitudes, and their achievement. And we found that the very most effective programs were in schools where the parents, the families, the community organizations, the principals all work together as one team. And we're calling that strategy expanding the school day, and it really focuses on the whole child. Each public school partners with a community organization to jointly plan programs and staff and figure out how to staff a longer school day. Teachers and community educators work side by side to fortify kids against the stresses of poverty. And students learn through a balanced curriculum that includes not only academic support, but arts and movement, hands-on science, cooking, gardening, a whole range of activities. And the whole community benefits. The data tells us that parents work more steadily if they know that their kids are safe. And we know that the young adults that are employed in these programs become role models for the younger children. And these young adults also put their wages back into their neighborhoods, and we grow talent across the city. Recently, we added 20 new New York City middle schools to our Expand Ed network. And it's an exciting partnership among the Department of Education, Robin Hood, Task, Harvard Ed Labs, an organization called Reserve that works with retired adults, and several of the city's leading community-based organizations. Our collective goal with Middle School Extra is to ensure that every student in these schools reads proficiently by the time they finish 8th grade, and that every student develops optimism, really develops their talents and passions, and the critical thinking skills that will help them thrive in college and careers. And the way it works, it's 2.5 hours more a day, every day, and within that 2.5 hours, in addition to enriching activities, there's an hour of embedded literacy with small group instruction. So, we have been building over the last 15 years an after-school infrastructure that stands ready to work with the mayor-elect and his team to support the many public schools and community-based organizations that are prepared and willing to provide the experiences that help fill the learning gap for low-income students through after-school, summer, and a wide variety of expanded learning opportunities. And I think from his remarks today, we are confident that our incoming city leaders will build on and strengthen these and other school community initiatives by committing resources to both scaling the initiatives and sustaining them. Of course, great change starts with small steps. So let me leave you with some concrete suggestions for changes that the new administration could make early on that would help us help more kids. We could eliminate double licensing by the Department of Education and the Department of Health for facilities and staffing. We could get the city attendance system for school and after school to speak to each other. And finally, the federal government makes free suppers available to kids who are in after-school programs. And this is one of the few uncapped federal entitlements. And with 1/4 of New York City kids sometimes going home hungry, our city should certainly capitalize on these resources. And let me finish by noting that the benefits of after-school and summer learning compound over time. They should start at an early age, but I think the challenge is urgent right now to succeed with middle school. We're excited to help a new administration meet this challenge of ensuring that middle school students have a safe, inspiring place to be after the traditional school day ends at 3 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two people lined up as first respondents to this panel, so I want to call first on Lawrence Aber, who is the Wilner Family Professor in Psychology and Public Policy at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, and University Professor at NYU. Where are you? And
Thank you very much, and thanks to this panel for distinguished continuing of a bunch of themes. I, too, was encouraged by Mayor-elect deBlasio's emphasis on after-school as well as universal pre-K. And for those of you who aren't developmental science junkies, it is actually a time in life when brain development, emotional development, social relationships are all undergoing a second major transition. The development of the forebrain of executive function and planfulness is very big then. So I think that we're picking 2 points of high leverage. I do want to mention the 2 other points that are undercapitalized. So I mentioned already earlier today that the summit's earlier emphasis on infants and toddlers, I think, could not be more important. The only universal platform we have for infants and toddlers is the healthcare platform. We do not have a universal early care and education platform. We need to make infant and toddler, pediatric and primary preventive care learning experiences and mental health experiences rich, as well as physical health experiences rich. And then the second major transition is out of secondary school. Before kids enter school and after kids leave public school, that's when families have the biggest economic burden of supporting their young people. 80% of public expenditures is spent on kindergarten to grade 12 education in the nation. So when poor families are taking care of their kids before they get into school or after they leave publicly supported school, that's when public supports are most important. So I personally want to hope that the mayor-elect focuses on the first 3 years of life as critically important and the transition after high school. And if we had 4 major targets of a truly developmental perspective on getting kids from womb to at least their first paycheck, I'd be a happy guy.
thank you, Dr. Aber. Up next is Pam Cantor, MD, President and CEO of Turnaround for Schools. Dr. Cantor, where are you?
Right here, Turnaround for Children. Larry provided 2 bookends, and so to get our kids to the first paycheck, I'm going to focus on K-12. You know, in connecting the dots around things that have been said today, one big theme has been that poverty is a trauma in children's lives. It's an adversity, it's internalized, and it impacts children's development. The way that shows up in schools is student unreadiness for learning, kids that are often tuned out and distracted. Imagine 30 of them in a classroom and think about what that means for teachers who don't feel that there's anything in their training that prepared them for the level of disruption or the lack of engagement in learning. And then think about 500 or 600 kids in a school, and you begin to see the aggregation of risk and the impact on school culture that's negative and that has very, very low expectations for achievement. I want to put a picture in your mind. Folks at Turnaround in our research department created a new algorithm of risk and looked at all the schools in New York City using this algorithm. It included free and reduced lunch, of course, but included racial mix, ELL, and special ed. When you look at that algorithm of risk across the entire city, what you find is that 65% of our schools fall into the highest level of risk. What does that mean? It means that when we look at the things that have been talked about today in and of themselves, community schools, wraparound service, health clinics, mental health clinics, they've all been done. Okay, but they have not been done together. We've had a real problem with integration of things that have to be done to reach the kind of tipping point that actually drives down risk. And right now, there actually is no incentive to do that. There is an incentive for each of us, including my organization, to keep finding schools to work in. And we're not going to get there that way. So what I'm suggesting that the mayor, and this is such an incredible opportunity that we have, is that we have to create what we call at Turnaround fortified teaching and learning environments. Why fortified? Because good isn't good enough when you've been exposed to the kind of adversity and challenge of poverty. And were this mayor to establish a set of design principles for these kinds of environments in schools, and were those design principles to have attributes associated with them, competencies and metrics, then schools would be incentivized, and we as organizations would be incentivized to build those environments together and to drive down risk in these schools and drive up readiness. And this is a bit of a dream, if we were able to do it in 12 to 18 months in those 65% of New York City schools, then the reforms in curriculum, in standards, in blended learning would have a shot at working. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cantor. I'm going to invoke moderator's privilege here and ask a couple of follow-up questions of our panelists. And after that, for our remaining time, you can raise your hands or turn your name tags on their sides, and also raise your hands, because I'm not sure I'll see all the name tags with that subtle change in them, if you want to ask a question. Dr. Friedman, I mentioned before that I found it newsworthy that the mayor-elect seemed to elevate after school to equal billing today with pre-K, which perhaps he's been doing all along and I just haven't been aware of it. But I know with pre-K he has a plan to pay for it, and he talked about that with respect to the income tax hike on the very wealthy. Do you know if he has a plan to fund universal middle school after school, and what it would take in your opinion?
Yeah, so actually when he, it was about a year ago when he first proposed the plan, and at that point he talked about the surcharge covering both after school and early childhood, and the figure for after school he gave was 190 million, which we believe would cover about a third of the all middle schoolers, so it could really reach those kids most in trouble.
So that would be covered in
But
the
I guess
same
what I
tax.
should add is that there has been, over the last 10 years, a lot under Commissioner Mulgrave, who's here today with us, effort. There's been a big growth. The after-school system has really developed an infrastructure, and so we think we are really ready. Both the demand is there as well as the supply is there, and there are already resources invested so that it would not be all new resources.
And
necessary.
Dr. Yoshikawa, a question about where the research that you presented meets the politics. I wonder if we're headed toward a global warming type situation where there is study after study now, and you presented some of the recent ones, that shows that there is a measurable impact from quality early childhood education through those children's lives later on. And yet what I think I hear in the political discussion is, oh, the jury's out, there's evidence that the effects of Head Start dissipate by third grade. I think that was one particular study. Are we heading toward a point where there's an overwhelming body of evidence as far as social scientists are concerned, but the trick now is going to be to communicate it to the media and the political sector?
Yes, I think the communication challenges are big, but the evidence from both the neuroscience and the economic sciences, and let alone the social sciences, is truly overwhelming. We do in the brief also talk about this puzzle of how it is that effects on standardized test scores seem to quote unquote fade during middle childhood, and yet we see very important societal impacts by adulthood, like reduced high school graduation, reduced teen pregnancy, reduced juvenile violence and delinquency. And so the short answer to that is that we think that there are particular kinds of skills in socio-emotional development and engagement with schools that are not simply captured by the standardized reading and math tests.
Thank you very much. All right, who would like to ask a question?
Thanks. I'm Marjorie Rhodes from NYU Psychology Department. And I just want to pick up on Dr. Yoshikawa's point about the importance of having a developmentally focused preschool curriculum. I want to add to our thinking about this that we know the preschool years are important not only for building basic skills and things like math and literacy, but are also when kids begin to develop their interests and their beliefs about what they're capable of. Some of the research that we've been doing has been looking at how subtle features of the interactions that kids have with their educators can shape whether they see themselves as capable of success, particularly in topics that they might view as more challenging or specialized, like math and science, whether they develop interest in these areas and the motivation to work hard in these areas, especially as tasks become more challenging. So I think in developing a holistic approach to early childhood development, as we've all been talking about today, it's going to be important to include those aspects of child development when thinking about training and assessment as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody from the panel want to reflect on any of the last three comments? Michael Rebell?
Well, I just really wanted to pull some of this together and tie it to one of the last statements that Mr. deBlasio made when he talked about how moved he was by his trip to Cincinnati. And we hadn't gotten this out on the table. In the morning session, we talked a lot about ways to have all the groups here come together and try to focus to move this agenda ahead. But I just wanted to put out there that in Cincinnati, they have a project called Strive, which did bring together not only the city government, but the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and got literally 300 groups to come up with a common agenda with 5 major goals aiming at education and advancing a children's agenda. So whether it takes that exact form or another form, we talked about children's cabinets and various mechanisms, I do hope that the message that comes out of this group today is in accordance with what the mayor-elect was saying, that we find some way to organize all the talent here related to the private sector, the government sector, and really advance the kind of agenda he's been talking about.
You've been watching a special edition of BrianLehrer.tv from the New York City Summit on Children, held at Columbia University on November 25th, sponsored by their Earth Institute. We roll out a new program every week at this time. Talk to you next week. I'm Brian Lehrer.